Thank you. New this morning, Amherst man will spend up to 5 years in state prison following a multi-state investigation into the distribution of child sex abuse images. Blake Lassiter, formerly of Amherst, pleaded guilty to a slew of child pornography charges earlier this month. According to court documents, he distributed images to another party in the United Kingdom. Lassiter is currently serving 2 years in an Oregon jail for similar charges. This investigation started when Lassiter, a former member of the U.S. Coast Guard, became the subject of a cyber tip, first in Oregon and then here in Massachusetts. After his 2-year stint in Oregon, he will spend up to 5 years in a state prison here, followed by 5 years probation, sex offender treatment, and he will not be allowed to have unsupervised contact with minors.